Yes.
What genre is Trailer Park Warlock? Because there's about 20 of them breathing through the title alone.
Yeah, so originally on Webtoons it was in the genre of fantasy, which it still is.
Okay,
but
I can see that.
After a conversation between me and my editor, we ended up moving it to comedy.
Okay.
Because we felt like that might match better the overall sense of it. But I think that it could rest in either, and it's an interesting question, right? Because how do you define genre, right? And I particularly like to write stories that are blends of genre. Kind of going back to our food metaphors, I like to make something that can be very difficult to define, and I think that was sort of part of the initial aspect of your question you were asking, because it is kind of there's a lot of different genres that show up in Trailer Park Warlock, but I'm curious to know from your perspective, how would you define Trailer Park Warlock from a genre? Because like I said, I'm saying fantasy comedy.
Yeah.
Right.
See, originally, before you said fantasy, I had completely not discounted, but just forgotten that is a genre. I almost said science fiction, but definitely comedy was mixed in there, because there's an absurdity about the idea of a warlock coming from a trailer park. Like the two words are contrast, and right there you have like a weird sense of like irony, or just like a juxtaposition of two things that don't normally go together, and that's the recipe for comedy. So that's why, like, immediately, no matter what whether it was sci-fi or fantasy or whatnot attached to it, comedy was always going to be at the forefront. I would have actually thought that comedy would have been the first genre that you would have listed. So instead of a fantasy comedy, I would have thought you would have said it was a comedy fantasy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I say that too because like that was how originally it was because it was first listed as fantasy. I've kind of always sort of thought about that in that way in my head, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it goes into kind of figuring out like, well, how do you determine the genre of a thing, right?
Yeah.
And part of that I think has to do with the expectations that you want the audience to go into the work with, right?
Yep.
So like, if you tell somebody, oh, it's a horror movie, they expect somebody's gonna die, or at least like something.
They'll
something
be scared.
Scary.
There's some horrifying shit. Yeah.
Yeah, something scary is gonna happen. You can definitely have horror movies where somebody doesn't die, but you're gonna have something happen that's gonna be terrifying or surprise you or shock you. Whereas something like comedy, your expectation is to laugh, right?
Mm-hmm.
That seems like comedy seems like one of the simpler ones to me, because it's like if you don't meet the criteria of laughing, you pretty much fail, right, at the comedy thing. Whereas go ahead.
And the interesting thing about comedy is that is a measured result. I can make a horror movie and someone can say that was really scary, but at no point in their entire viewing would they have screamed or ran out of the room or this or that, but they could have just been like, that was really fucking scary, but they didn't have any reaction. If you have a comedy and you don't laugh out loud, that is like is a physical, measurable response.
Yeah.
That has to occur. It's almost like watching porn and not getting aroused. It's like, well, porn didn't do its job. Like, those are the only two genres I can say pretty much have measurable responses.
Yeah, that gives me a lot to think about, because that is something that I like. I don't know. I've thought a lot about going forward if I'm going to be writing any other stories after Trailer Park Warlock, if I want to continue the comedy route, and I think I do, because I enjoy trying to figure out how to get people to laugh or chuckle, or at least have some kind of humor response, right? Like, not necessarily, especially with comics, like there are a lot of comic strips that are funny, but you're not going to laugh, right? You're gonna like, oh, that's funny, or
Yeah.
like smile or whatever. But more to the point, like I've thought a lot about, okay, I do want to do different genres in the future. Like I wouldn't mind doing like a science fiction story. I think that would be fun. And science fiction is very different, or can be very different from fantasy in certain senses, because science fiction gives the expectation that what you're going to see could potentially be real in the world at some point. So a lot of
Yes.
originally when the genre of science fiction came about with like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, you can go to some authors further before them. I mean, technically, Mary Shelley wrote the first science fiction story with Frankenstein. And while none of the events that happened in Frankenstein have quite come to pass in our day, it it did do a lot of the it did do a lot of the thinking about the repercussions, which is also another mainstay of science fiction, of like thinking about the repercussions of technology, thinking about the repercussions of certain discoveries that we could make in the field of science. Um, so my point, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I guess to get to my point, early science fiction writers uh, came into the genre with the interest of thinking about what things could be like in the future, and then speculating also on possibilities in the world. So there's always a groundedness of like, here's what is possible in our real lived lives. Whereas in fantasy, the everything goes out the window basically. Like kind of anything could happen in fantasy. It works better when you have rules, right? But the rules are not necessarily
Of this world. Yeah.
Yes, they're not expected in the same way as science fiction. In science fiction, the less rules that science fiction has, oftentimes the harder it is. It not necessarily always, but the harder it is to enjoy. So like Star Wars, right? Is that a science fiction movie or is that like a fantasy movie?
Yeah, I don't know. They're talking about making real lightsabers now. So
Yeah, that's true.
I saw that a couple of days ago. So it's definitely questionable. I mean, space travel is moving forward and forward, not nearly
Yes.
at as fast a rate as they probably thought in the 70s and 80s when they were making these, but we're kind of picking that ball back up now that we're kind of trashed the planet and we need a new one to do. So I think that's kind of moving along.
I don't know if I've ever talked with you about this, but there's something called I think it's called Clarke's law. The author Arthur C. Clarke came up with this idea, which was that I'm sure you've heard of it. It's like any sufficient technology is indistinguishable from magic. So his idea was that there's a point in technology that can get so advanced that for people like, for anybody who doesn't have that technology,
Yeah.
it might as well be magic to them.
Right.
And so in terms of genre, it sort of implies that fantasy and sci-fi are kind of co-entangled to a certain extent. Like,
sure.
I'm sure there are we don't
I would
know
say
yet.
science. I would say science fiction is based in the basic evidence that is supplied to us now. It's just blown out of proportion. Whereas fantasy, there's no currently existing evidence to support those ideas. But that it's almost like the agnostic viewpoint. It's like, well, I don't know if there's anything out there, but there could be. Like it's that 50-50 kind of, you know what I mean? Like straddling the fence. Before we move too far on, I want to challenge something that you said about Frankenstein not actually happening. What is the basic science fiction that happens in Frankenstein? There's a dead body that's brought to life through electricity, correct? And so I challenge this. What do paramedics do sometimes when people aren't alive when they arrive at a scene? They rub the little thingies together, say clear, and they zap you with electricity. Do they not?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's
And
true.
I
That's 100%.
I
That
have not
a thing that
researched on this at
probably.
all, but a part of me is wondering, was somebody watching that movie and said, "Huh, I wonder if I could zap somebody back to life," and that's where that came. I have no idea. Um,
Right.
Part of me wants to look it up now, and I think I'm probably going to when we're done with this episode. But you look at things like a science fiction film like Back to the Future, and they had hoverboards, and then it's kind of interesting because it's one of those things where I think one of the creators of Back to the Future talked about how art, and I think they were specifically meaning movies, but art influences not just culture and everything like that, but it also takes like the possibilities that people think up of, and then people watch a movie and they're like, how do I make that? And now we have fucking hoverboards. They don't really work as well, but people are working
Yeah.
on them to make them work better, and as they do in the movie, they missed the deadline of when we were supposed to have them. Same thing with flying cars. But to be honest with you, part of me wonders, and this is getting way off topic from art and storytelling, but part of me wonders if we do have the technology for flying cars and somebody said, you know what? People suck at driving as it is. Maybe we should just put this one in a warehouse next to all the Indiana Jones shit and never let anybody know that it's there. Because I don't see why we wouldn't have that technology. You know what I mean? Like we have planes and jets and drones and helicopters, all that kind of stuff. There's no reason why we shouldn't have flying cars.
I feel like you could at least make a bigger version of a drone at the very least.
Yeah.
By a drone I mean like those four propeller, kind of things that hover and can go up and down or whatever.
But the only difference is now you can crash vertically.
Yes. Which is kind of
that's an added
kind
unnecessary problem. Yeah. Because
kind of a problem. Part of the reason why we make science fiction movies, right, is to imagine those problems.
Yeah,
basically.
and that's the other part of it is to imagine. Yeah, so like to manage the expectations of the world, in terms of where our civilization should be going. But I want to get back on topic. So we're talking about genre in general, and I wanted to bring up a point that I wanted to make about. You talked about the expectations that genre brings, but I felt like there was more to it. I was thinking about this topic today, and there's also certain it's not an expectation, it's more of an allowance that you can do certain things in an expected genre that you can't in others. So for example, one of my very few areas of expertise, in a horror film, you can end the film on a down note, a sour note, the hero loses, they're stuck in hell to be tortured forever, and it's totally fine. Like it's almost expected. It's not a required expectation. That's why I'm not calling it an expectation, but it is allowed. You can get away with certain things like that. In an action movie, I would expect that John McClane can jump off the side of a building, use a fire hose, kick in a window, and then he'll still be fine. He'll just have a little bit of blood and soot on him, and everything's cool. But if you did that in a horror movie, I'd be pissed. I'd be like, no, he should have died there. That was the moment to kill him.
That's getting me thinking too, because it's like See, to me that gets into the idea of expectations, because in a horror movie it almost seems like there's an expectation for the hero to be less powerful, and that horror cannot prop itself up properly unless we have the expectation that our heroes, our protagonists, what's that?
They're vulnerable.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way of putting it. But I do like what you're saying about allowance too, because it's like you cannot do that. Like what you were saying with horror, you generally can't. It's hard to do in a comedy, right? Like, the original definition for a comedy was something that ends happily, right? And over time it's changed because we have added new elements, tried new things. So you have comedies where it does end on a down note, or it ends at least like, you know, the protagonist doesn't get everything that they want. Something something tragic might happen at the end, or it's, you know, neutered in some way, basically.
You could get away
Which
with
is when,
that in a comedy though. If the ending is a quote unquote letdown, as long as
yeah,
it's funny, as you said before, as long as
yeah,
like
exactly.
if the hero ends up with egg on his face, we don't much care as long as we're laughing at them. Like
That's true.
that's
Yeah, a lot of Charlie Chaplin films are like,
right.
oh well, he's a hobo again, and then goes about his, his business.
Yeah.
A lot of early comedies are like that, where it's like some poor schmuck gets into a situation, and then at the end of the movie or the film or whatever, returns to be a poor schmuck. And that is a really, that's actually something. This is sort of off tangent, but I've been thinking about it a lot because I kind of would like to see that in modern like storytelling a little bit more, because there is a certain amount of, in our day and age, a lot of people are struggling with finances and struggling with like hardships in life, and
Sure.
a lot of those films, a lot of those Charlie Chaplin type films, or Buster Keaton, and other filmmakers like that, made the stories that they made for people to relate to, because this was like, getting into the Great Depression era. And so it was a way to sort of lift spirits up
Yeah.
despite all this crap that was happening at the time. And there's that, I don't know, like, this is, like I said, this is totally an off-topic thing that I'm thinking about in regards to comedy nowadays, because so much comedy, I don't know if it I don't know if it fully grasps the spirit of our moment right now, in the sense that a lot of people are struggling and they don't have quite the not the tools, but the resources to kind of properly cope comedically with, or have the gallows humor, or the humor to just sort of like deal with the difficulties of our situation
Yeah.
right now,
Well,
modern times.
not to get too political, I guess is the word. Um, I'm not even talking about politics in general. I'm just talking about like the culture that the internet is breeding these days. You talk,
Mm-hmm.
people talk about cancel culture and yada yada yada, and I'm sick of people talking about cancel culture, and it's just fucking annoying. But at the same time, because there is cancel culture that does exist. I'm not knocking that at all. There's also the culture of people complaining about cancel culture, and that exists, and I'm fucking annoyed with that. But
It's like they're two different genres
yeah,
of like social commentary.
yeah. But the question is like, there is eggshells these days that people walk on, and even the people
Yes.
who complain about cancel culture still walk on those eggshells because they're afraid of it. It's one of those things where you literally do not know what joke you can get away with and what joke you cannot, and it differs by person. So I think one of the main thing about comedy is 9 times out of 10 it has to be edgy or bold or pushing the line on good taste. And no matter what, it's the fucking internet. You're going to find someone who's upset by it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, doesn't matter what the joke is. I'm sure there's people who look at Arrested Development and are fucking offended by some of the jokes in there
Oh
about.
yeah. I remember years ago when the news, like when they had started this new seasons on Netflix, like even before it even came out, there were people complaining about the old seasons, and it's like, well, maybe you just didn't like Arrested Development, and that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
it's not everybody's, like, within the genre of comedy. It's its own subsection of comedy that's very specific to its audience,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a kind of comedy that predicates itself on like being um, rewarding people who view it often. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
It's uh it's very unique in that way. But more, I guess getting back onto the topic of genre in general. What do you feel like is an overlooked genre right now in our current time?
It's usually done as Oscar bait. So I'm gonna deviate from what are normally considered genres and go into what is my screenwriting Bible, Save the Cat. So the
Yeah.
author of Save the Cat broke down genre differently than what most people would. Most people would say drama, horror, comedy, action, fantasy, stuff like that. Blake Snyder had a completely different outlook. And I pulled up his book right in front of me, and there's several different ones, and I'm going to explain to you what they are, and then
Okay.
I will answer your question. So the first one is called Monster in the House. Now, typically, this would fall into the horror genre. But he outlines exactly what criteria is expected to make it fall into this thing. And then you suddenly realize that both Alien, the original Ridley Scott one, and Jaws are the same fucking movie. In
Sure.
space! So the first, or the three things that are required for a monster in the house, and the house could be anything. The house could be a planet. The house could be a ship. Doesn't matter. But it's a
Gotcha.
small enclosed space that can include a family unit, an entire town, a world. Doesn't matter. The second thing it needs is a monster of some kind of supernatural strength, powers, even if it's insanity. Like if the superpower is it's just so fucking crazy, and it's evil at its core. So it's just almost like a force of nature. And then lastly, there's a quote unquote a sin. Someone is guilty of bringing the monster into the house, some kind of transgression that includes ignorance. A most notable example of that is in the movie Scream, when Randy lays out the rules. He's talking about the transgressions that trigger those monsters. And if you look at any horror movie, those are the criteria. You're stuck in the woods. You're stuck in a cabin. You're stuck in a haunted house. You're stuck somewhere, and that's what happens. And there's a monster, and then there's somebody who did something that everybody knew in the first 10 minutes. They're like, oh, you stupid moron. You're not supposed to do that. And everybody gets it. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a horror movie. It just means that it's a monster in the house. So, like, you have like a pure monster type movie. So you could look at Jaws, Tremors, The Thing, Jurassic Park,
Yes.
Anaconda, Deep Blue Sea, Godzilla, Independence Day, Men in Black, or Lake Placid. All the same fucking movie. All meet the same exact criteria. The second genre.
I like the way that he's going about that. That's really interesting because it's like it's a way of further breaking down the patterns in genres to like something more I guess more basic than that. It's almost like how scientists are like, oh, there are subatomic particles in atoms. And,
yeah,
you know
but
what I mean?
it's a little bit more broad stroked where you can kind of understand, but then you can start seeing the strings that pull everything together, and you realize Jaws and Alien are the same exact movie. The second genre he has is the Golden Fleece, which is has three requirements as well: a road spanning oceans, time, or across the street, so long as it demarcates growth. It often includes a road apple that stops the trip cold. Number two is a team or buddy the hero needs to guide him along the way. Usually it's those who represent the things that the hero doesn't have, like a skill, experience, or attitude. And then last but not least, a prize, something that's sought and something that's like primal, going home, securing a treasure, or regaining birthright, something along those lines. And that's kind of like the Golden Fleece. So it's interesting, but you could look at something like, I don't know, The Bad News Bears, and it's the same thing as planes, trains, and automobiles.
Yeah, sure. Or Lord of the Rings, or a lot. I mean, I was just thinking
Saving
about a
Private
lot of
Ryan.
different.
Sure.
Yes, exactly. That really lays out for me. Because that's kind of like it's sort of hero's journey
Yes,
description to a
basically.
certain extent.
I would agree.
Because like I think that could also be Star Wars to some extent.
Yep.
That's a lot of different heroic type movies.
But they all fit the
So
same
are there?
criteria.
Yes.
And they don't
So was there?
but you look at it and
No,
then
go
you
ahead.
realize while Star Wars and I don't know, Lord of the Rings, National Treasure, whatever you want to list, they all
Yeah.
have those things in common. They do not have the things in common with Monster in the House.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Also, National Lampoon's Vacation could also be put into that category too.
Yep.
Or Stripes.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot of comedy movies for sure go in there.
The next genre, quote unquote, and this is where I feel like Trailer Park Warlock might be stuck.
Oh,
Is
interesting.
something called Out of the Bottle.
Okay.
Which is basically they. So okay, I'll knock out the three things required for Out of the Bottle. Number one,
Okay.
a wish asked for by the hero or granted by another, and the clearly seen need to be delivered from the ordinary. Number two is a spell, which in setting up this illogical thing, we must make logical by upholding the rules, no matter how tempting it may be to use double mumbo jumbo, which is Blake Snyder's way of saying you can have aliens and you can have warlocks, but you cannot have aliens and warlocks in the same movie, which goes against the whole cowboys and aliens kind of setup. But he speaks very ill of that whole thing of combining two far out there flavors.
He wouldn't like Trailer Park Warlock then.
Yeah. And then last but not least, a lesson, a be careful what you wish for running theme in all of Out of the Bottles. Would you say that that's what Trailer Park Warlock is, or no?
I'm thinking that it could be closer to Golden Fleece than to
That's fair.
Out of the Bottle. Is at least currently, because I haven't finished the story yet. And
see, I'm looking at the magic component, and I'm getting blinded by it. And this is where I'm still in the process of educating myself about what it is. So I think you're actually right. You're probably closer to Golden Fleece.
I would like to hear though more examples of the out of the like. Can you think of any? Because I'm trying to. I can't think of any examples right now for the Out of the Bottle.
Freaky Friday.
Okay.
13 going on 30. The Hot Chick. 18 again. Hang on a minute. Mary Poppins.
I'll say there are episodes of Trailer Park Warlock that definitely use that concept. A major plot element of season 2 is based off of some aspect of that where Jake basically deals with the ramifications of magic that he used to cheat a baseball game, basically. And so, there are ramifications for breaking rules, and then has to go through that process of dealing with it, basically. So anyway, just to answer your question.
That's fair. Couple more examples of Out of the Bottle, and I think this one nails it perfectly. Bruce Almighty.
Oh yeah.
That's like I would say that's like template level right there. But you also have a lot of Jim Carrey movies. The Mask, you know what I mean? Like just those like a normal person gets an extraordinary power and they have to learn to kind of manage what comes with it.
It's basically going through a process of transformation, returning back to normal, and then taking all the elements, like taking in the lesson, I think you might have already said this, but taking in the lessons learned from that transformational experience, as opposed to with the Golden Fleece, it's like the whole process is getting to the transformational experience, and then there isn't the lesson learned is like what happens on the way to that transformational experience.
Yep.
So almost kind of like an inversion. Those two things are almost like inversions of each other.
Yeah.
It seems like to me.
The next genre, Dude with a Problem. And the
Okay.
dude is not gender specific. It's just how he titles it. But the 3 rules for that are: an innocent hero is dragged into this mess without asking for it or even aware of how he got involved. Number 2 is
This is already starting like Trailer Park Warlock.
see, and Trailer Park Warlock seems to be on the same thing as Die Hard then, because this is exactly Die Hard. A sudden event that thrusts our innocence into the world of hurt is definite and comes without warning. And then last but not least, a life or death battle is at stake and the continued existence of an individual, family, group, or society is in question.
Yeah, it's a little bit more Park Warlock, I'd say. To a certain extent.
This is North by Northwest, Enemy of the State, The Long Kiss Goodnight, Die Hard. What else? Fugitive, Speed, Air Force One, Man on Fire. Just trying to think of other.
Is Bruce Willis necessary for this?
It might be the fourth
genre.
Yeah, Deep Impact.
Must feature Bruce Willis.
Day After Tomorrow. Yeah, all these things are pretty much Bruce Willis vehicles. So that's how they. Maybe that's why I named it Dude with a Problem. He just thinks of Bruce Willis first and foremost.
Although I don't know if Sense would fall into that category. Sixth Sense might be more out of the bottle, or it's not Golden State, and it's not Monster in the House.
No.
Unless there's another genre you're gonna read to me.
There's a couple more. Hang on. I'm just doing a quick search. The Wonderful World of Kindle. And see if Blake himself. Bingo. Hang on. Oh, is that what it is? Ah, yeah, we'll get there. Hang on a minute. I don't want to skip ahead to it.
Fascinated.
We just did Dude with a Problem, right? So next one up is Rites of Passage.
Yeah. Okay.
Rites of Passage. The 3 requirements for Rites of Passage. Number 1, a life problem. From puberty to midlife to death. Universal passages that we all understand. Number 2, a wrong way to attack the mysterious problem, usually a diversion from confronting the pain. Number 3, a solution that involves acceptance of a hard truth that the hero has been fighting and the knowledge it's the hero that must change, not the world around them.
Okay. I can think of I'm trying to think of some movies that go with that. I thought I had one and I don't anymore. Or some stories, not necessarily movies.
I'm just trying to find ones that people would understand. Kramer versus Kramer.
Okay.
The First Wives Club. Stepmom. This feels very rom-com but coming of age kind of stuff.
Sure. The coming of age. I mean, I feel like coming of age is probably just synonymous with rites of passage.
Yeah, I think he just danced up he just changed the words. It's basically the same thing. But when you talk to people about genre, nobody really mentions coming of age. You know what I mean? They always go to.
No, it's one of my favorite genres too, actually, because like I grew up on Wonder Years, so like, I mean that's an entire series based on coming of age. So the whole theme of the show was sort of plotted on how the main character goes through all these rites of passage throughout his life and how it affects him and all that stuff.
I would absolutely say, and I don't know when the last time you've watched it was, Digits is 100% a rites of passage movie. I wish I had known more about this book when I had actually made Digits, because it'd probably be a lot tighter and a little bit more focused on what it's supposed to be. But in the end, that is what that movie is. It's about a guy learning to grow, not to force his friends to stay the same or to change the way he's changing, but to allow himself to become his own man and embrace the things that he likes and let go of the things that he doesn't. And if his little group of buddies don't go with that, then they're part of the things that he has to let go.
I'm also thinking of this might be too on the nose because this movie might not actually fit it, and I'm just thinking about it too literally. But the other movie that came up to my mind was The Sandlot. Because it's very much, it has elements of rites of passage to it, right?
Sure.
Like getting the baseball and then meeting the old man sort of is this moment of they pass from kind of being boys to men to a certain extent by facing their fears.
Yep.
And then, the main character gets he doesn't get his ball back. He gets the old man's ball, doesn't he?
Yeah, he gets a new one.
Yeah, that's right.
It's signed by like the whole 1927 Yankees.
That's right.
It's
that's
not
right.
just Babe Ruth. It's like the whole fucking clubhouse. But yeah, I would definitely say that falls in there. All right, so the next one is called Buddy Love, and it's really easy to figure out. But this is a lot of like rom-com movies, but it also extends beyond that, what you might expect. So things like Lethal Weapon would be like a buddy love movie.
That's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah. It's, the two people who just don't connect correctly, but they kind of balance each other out. Riggs and Murtaugh are easy that. But you also look at like any rom-com, and you have the uptight chick and the cool, easygoing guy. And you know what I mean? It's a recipe for comedy. The Odd Couple. That's basically what it is. The 3 points for Buddy Love is it's about an incomplete hero who's missing something physical, ethical, or spiritual. He needs another to be whole. The second thing is a counterpart who makes that completion come about. Or in the case of a three-hander, a story about a triangle, or a four-hander, a story about two couples, has qualities the heroes need. And number 3 is a complication, be it a misunderstanding, a personal or ethnic viewpoint, epic historical event, or prudish disapproval of society. So I guess you can probably guess where he's going with this when he says a epic historical event or the prudish disapproval of society. I don't know about you, but the moment I read that, the first thing that jumped out at me was Titanic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
Two of those things, you know what I mean? The epic historical event. And
that is a really interesting perspective. I didn't even think, that was not the first movie that came to my mind, but I'm seeing it now. Interesting.
It really, the first time I read this book, it blew my mind, because I never would have put two particular movies like these in, like I would not put Lethal Weapon and Titanic in the same genre, but they absolutely are. 100%.
Okay, so here's a question. Would Avatar be also in the buddy love category?
I'm going to make...
Or is it more rites of passage?
This might get my movie card revoked, but I have never seen Avatar.
Oh, okay. Well, you'll survive. The world will go on.
It was one of those movies that just got way overhyped for me. So... yeah. I just said, you know what? I think I'll wait for video. And everyone was like, no, you can't do that. You got to go see it in 3D. I'm like, I've seen 3D. And they're like, not like this. And I was like, I'm not even going to bother now because you guys have just overhyped it.
The funny thing about Avatar is I feel like if I were to put it into a genre, I'd put it into the genre of James Cameron movie, because it felt so much like it was just like James Cameron mashed all of his movies together into one movie.
There's some Terminator elements in there?
It's been a while since I've watched it, but I bet you I could find some. There are definitely elements of aliens in there.
Okay.
There are definitely like elements of. There's some elements of Titanic a little bit, not like majorly. Terminator. I feel like I could make the argument if I watched the movie again that there were elements of Terminator in the movie, because there's definitely like there's sort of a John Connor. I mean, there is a Messiah thing kind of going on in the movie, but not necessarily like nobody's coming back from the future to like stop it or whatever.
Yeah.
But there is. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna ramble a little bit about how there is an interesting element of genre where sometimes certain creators are so specific to themselves. This is kind of going back to the signature thing, where it's like their own movies become a genre unto themselves. Or I could go into other
comes
art.
To mind, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Another example, like going into music, I would say like Frank Zappa was almost his own genre of music, because I haven't found anybody who's made music like his.
Yeah.
It's just like so totally weirdly his thing, or like a Scorsese movie is not necessarily a genre that's his own, but it's gonna involve gangsters to some extent, or it's going to involve some kind of thing about power, right? Some kind of story about men in power and how they deal with the ramifications of having that power, or how they deal with people within their social circle who are, trying to either wrestle that power from them, or I I'm trying to think of the proper words to define what I'm trying to say, but like, yeah, I guess ramifications of power. That's the best way. That's keeping it succinct.
There you go.
Succinct.
Even if you look at more modern directors like Christopher Nolan, there's a Nolan-esque
Oh yeah,
quality to every one of his things.
yeah,
You got a guy in a suit. Chances are there's a gun, and then there's kind of an exploration of time. I've been noticing more and more and more in his films. He's almost obsessed with the compression or expansion of time and what happens over the course of a time, whether it's jumping around in time, whether it's the
yeah.
understanding of time or traveling through time and space. Like there's a very grounded, realistic thing. But even like when you look at what was the war movie he did, Dunkirk, like
Okay.
the editing, he was fucking around with time when he was doing the editing, the technical aspect of that movie. But then in like Inception, he's fucking around with time when he's going down certain levels. Like this level is this many weeks of sleeping and this many days of sleeping, and it's almost like you could be stuck here for this amount of time. He's obsessed with time, and then you go all the way back to like
Yeah.
Memento. Like
That was exactly what I was thinking. Memento is definitely like a fucking with time kind of movie, because you have to piece together when things happen and all that stuff.
Yep.
And that makes sense too, because Christopher Nolan's he's such a brainy dude. So I'm sure like part of the idea is that cinema as an art form is it's entirely time based.
Yep.
Right? It's all about how you're packing in time, both uh, using all of the assets available to you, film, music, sound, etc., etc. So that makes a lot of sense to me. That is definitely, I would say, those are the core elements of a Christopher Nolan genre movie.
Pretty much. All right. So we're moving on, and now we're getting to the Sixth Sense genre, quote unquote.
Okay.
This is called the why done it, not the who done it, the why done it. And the three particular elements that are required for a why done it. Number one, a detective who does not change. We do, the audience. Yet he can do any kind of he can be any kind of gumshoe, from a pro to an amateur to imaginary. Number two, a secret of the case is so strong it overwhelms the worldly lures of money, sex, power, or fame. We got to know. And so does the why done it hero. And then third, last but not least, finally, the dark turn shows that in pursuit of the secret, the detective will break the rules, even his own, often ones that he has relied on for years to keep him safe. The pull of the secret is too great. And this is where Sixth Sense has been listed.
I see.
Along with a bunch of different movies. Fargo, Blade Runner, All the President's Men. I'm just looking here. Mystic River.
This is a genre of storytelling that I've never been. I like, but I've never been competent at like getting my hands into, if that makes sense. Like in terms of writing, I've never really. I guess maybe there are elements of season 3 of Trailer Park Warlock that might have had some amount of why done it to it, but it's a very tricky and difficult kind of genre. Going back to Blade Runner, a lot of Philip K. Dick's novels are like that in the sense of they're very much why done it. One of his books, The Man in the High Castle, is basically a why done it, but it's a very like it's extremely abstract, and you spend most of the time kind of learning about this alternate history that he's written. But ultimately, it comes down to this why done it of like, why did the person who's in this alternate history um, write a book that was the actual history of the reader's perspective, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a weird book. I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in like into feeling confused for a couple of months.
It is difficult to write a why done it because, I mean, if you think about it, when you watch a why done it, the whole thing, while you're watching it, you're thinking, who is it? You know, who's the spy? Who's the killer? Who's the whatever? But once you get there and it's like, it's me. If that was it, and then the movie ended, you'd feel incomplete. It's like, no. Where's your monologue? You got to give me the monologue. I got to know why. And that makes sense, which is why I'm curious in this particular book. Blake Snyder lists Scream as a monster in the house and not a why done it, which is curious to me because it's kind of both of them.
Yeah.
It is a horror mystery.
Well, and that's like, I mean, that's getting into. I feel like this is kind of going back to something that we talked about earlier, which is sort of an aspect of more modern movies is blending of genre. And I actually have to confess, I've never watched Scream, so I know that's something I have to fix. But I've definitely hearing you talk about it, it sounds like a movie that's extremely self-aware of what it is as a movie, and how it fits into the genre of horror.
First of all, let me manage your expectations accordingly.
Yeah.
It has been so copycatted to this day that when you watch it, you're going to be like, I don't see what the big deal is with the whole meta thing, because it has been so overdone since that movie that it just lost all of its power. But the reason I am obsessively in love with this movie is because beyond all that stuff's superfluous to me. It's not, it's, it's style. It's not the heart of the movie. The heart of the movie is very real. There's a mystery whodunit that's going on, but then there's also embedded within. So there's like different layers. So you got that meta aspect. Then you've got this horror whodunit going on. And then at the very bottom, like at the core, you have a coming of age. You have a rites of passage going on with the main character. And that's really what sings to why that movie stays relevant. And some of the other films, not so much in the film.
Yeah, because I think you already said that you would describe Scream as a Monster of the House movie, but so would you put that over the rites of passage aspects?
I would say it's a Monster in the House on the, if we're looking at a planet, the crust is the monster in the house. That's what gets the asses in the seats. The keeping your attention part, the magma or what's the next layer on Earth? I don't know.
I think there's a lot. I would say let's say magma.
Sure, the magma. I don't know what the actual inner core is going to be now, but the second layer is like the why done it. That's why you're paying attention to the movie.
Okay.
And you know what I mean? Like you're really trying to figure out who it is and why they're doing it and yada, yada, yada. And then at the very, very base core, the center of the entire movie, it's a rites of passage. It's about a young woman dealing with the fact, with the death of her mother from the year before and trying to cope with the fact that pretty much everybody else thinks she should have moved on by this point and she's not ready to. And it's just that's what resonates. That's like the primal thing that I think everyone can kind of relate to in the movie is when you watch it, the main character Sydney, it's like, well, everyone's telling her, she's got to get over it, she's got to move on, she can't dwell on it, and it's all this thing, but she's kind of haunted by it. It's it's her mother, and she's also
this is getting the this is getting the wheels turning in my head because I'm thinking about Jurassic Park, right? Jurassic Park is a monster in the house, but the core is rites of passage.
Absolutely.
To a certain extent. You know what I mean? Because like Dr. Alan Grant goes through. I mean, everybody who lives goes through a rites of passage. But like, I guess I'm gonna say Grant is the main protagonist in the sense that he's the one that we kind of end the movie on, begin to a certain extent in the movie on, in terms of who we relate to the most. And he goes through the rite of passage of like taking care of these children and then coming out the other end of it being like, kids aren't so bad, right?
Yeah, that's how he starts the movie. He's like, you really want to have one of those? I hate kids, da-da-da-da-da. And by the end of it, it's him sleeping and 2 kids under his arms, and he's content. Like, that's his arc. Yeah. That's his change. Absolutely. So I think we're starting to expose something here. Is that a lot of films that really transcend are not just one genre. They
I feel like
they don't just blend. I mean, and that's the thing. Yes. I think that's where I kind of disagree with you. I understand what you're saying, but I disagree with the way you're wording it. Is that I don't think they're necessarily blended. I think that they're layered, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Layering is probably a better way of putting it, because I don't necessarily know how to even think about it in regards to blending. That's just sort of the language that I use, because like let's go to Blade Runner, right? Like on the surface it's a science fiction movie, but underneath the science fiction it's a noir film. And it's a detective story. You're trying to find out like what is the deal with these replicants, why are they trying to find their creator? But then you're also there's another like layer underneath that in the detective story of like who is Deckard? Like what is his identity?
Yep.
And it becomes a story largely about people trying to understand their own identities. Like the actual detective story is people trying to understand who they are.
And not to be contradictory to myself from 30 seconds ago, but that is actually where I would say a genre is blended, because I would say that story you're talking about right there underneath the what did we say it was?
I said science fiction and noir.
Yeah, but the core of it is both a whodunit and a rites of passage. It's a blend.
See what you're saying.
Do you know what I'm saying? We're trying to figure out if Deckard is a replicant or not, and he's struggling kind of with that thought of what if I am, if I'm not, do I do this, do I not do it? You know what I mean? Like that's the blend right there, is that rite of passage. All right, we got 3 more. This one is fun. This one actually might be a little bit more Trailer Park Warlock.
Okay.
The Fool Triumphant. Now, I admittedly am a bad friend, and I have not read Trailer Park Warlock. However, I am planning on it. But I don't know, would Jake be considered a fool, or is he a competent warlock?
It depends on the episode.
Okay.
Because when you said the Full Triumphant, I'm like, I could already see this working. Because there are certainly elements to Jake that him as a character, he is often the butt of the joke more so than not.
Okay.
So I'd be interested in hearing more about the particular elements of the Full Triumphant.
Buckle up, because here we go. Number 1, a fool whose innocence is his strength, and whose gentle manner makes him likely to be ignored by all but a jealous quote-unquote insider who knows too well. Number 2, an establishment, the people or group a fool comes up against, either within his midst or after being sent to a new place in which he does not fit at first. Either way, the mismatch promises fireworks. And number 3, this is where I got that goddamn word, a transmutation in which the fool becomes someone or something new, often including a name change that's taken on either by accident or as a disguise.
Okay, well, I can answer succinctly that doesn't actually fit Trailer Park Warlock, but that does fit a novel that I'm reading right now called Stranger in a Strange Land, which is it's an older science fiction story. But
I could tell from just the title that you just said that it matches,
Right?
because I'm looking at some of the examples he's listing, and so within each of these quote unquote genres, he's listing subgenres. So, for example, for this one, there's the quote unquote political fool. So movies like this would be Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Bulworth, Meet John Doe, Dave, The Princess Diaries, Head of State. And then additionally, on top of that, you have The Undercover Fool. So things like Some Like It Hot, Soul Man, Working Girl, Mrs. Doubtfire, Mrs. Congeniality, Big Mama's House. Those are all Fool triumphant movies. Then you have The Societal Fool. So it's things like Forrest Gump, Sling Blade, I Am Sam. And last but not least, you have Fool Out of Water. So things like Legally Blonde, Beverly Hills Cop, Mr. Mom, Coming to America, Daddy Daycare, The Pacifier, Elf, things of that nature.
Wouldn't Thor also probably fall in that too?
Maybe.
Or at least his character. Well, his character's predicated on that. I guess maybe not narratively necessarily.
By the way, before I go too far into that, the next genre is superhero. It's literally just called superhero. But I did want to raise a point, though. You were talking about technology and magic are indistinguishable. That is a point that is made in the first Thor movie. When Thor's talking with Dr. Jane Foster, he's talking about that. And that's the exact same thing that you said. But since we're talking about superheroes, let's jump to that. And then last but not least, after that, we'll get to the answer to your question you asked me 45 minutes ago. We are at the superhero genre. Now, he does break into some distinguishing here. So it's not just people in tights. So number one, the hero of your tale must have a special quote-unquote power, even if it's just a mission to be great or do good. Number two, the hero must be opposed by a nemesis of equal or greater force who is the self-made version of the hero. And number three, there must be a curse for the hero that he either surmounts or succumbs to as a price for who he is. Now, you can say Spider-Man, Batman, obvious
ones.
You also have real-life superhero. So this is one of the subgenres, and he lists the following films: Raging Bull, Gandhi, Malcolm X, Passion of the Christ, Joan of Arc, Aaron Brockovich, Beautiful Mind, so on and so forth. Those would be considered superhero movies to some extent.
Because a major part of the narrative is about two opposing forces, and both representing sort of the opposing perspectives, basically.
Yep. The second subgenre is the storybook superhero: Peter Pan, Mulan, The Lion King, Little Mermaid, Willy Wonka, Ratatouille, Harry Potter. All of those would be storybook superheroes. Then you have the fantasy superhero. So something like The Matrix, The Neverending Story, Nightmare Before Christmas, Ants, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Van Helsing, Aragon. Did I say The Matrix? The Matrix.
You did say The Matrix.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand what distinguishes the storybook superhero from the fantasy superhero. And do you happen to have any idea? I
think that falls under the same one. Did I say there was a fantasy one?
For some reason I think I mistook what you said, because you had said like storybook superhero, and then I'd gone through the list of like Harry Potter, and a couple other things, and then said fantasy superhero, and it said like The Matrix, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and a couple other things.
Nope, fantasy.
And so I was just curious I was curious what the distinction was.
So example-wise, the storybook superheroes is like Peter Pan, Hunchback, Notre Dame, Lion King, Willy Wonka, Jungle Book, Little Mermaid, Harry Potter, Happy Feet, Ratatouille. The fantasy superhero Brazil, The Never-Ending Story, Nightmare Before Christmas, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Van Helsing, V for Vendetta, Aragon. So for the... Hold on. I'm going all the way back to the storybook. And I'm going to read what he says. Boop, 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 boop. In the subcategory of storybook superhero, we get all the manner of tales about princes, talking toys, and hunchbacks. As one who grew up in the elastic world of cartoons, I know and I love this world. And though different from live-action writing, it's the same. If I had my druthers, I'd start every screenwriting class with a study of animated movies. Why? Well, for one, they offer amazing lessons about how to write character and dialogue. Having worked with some of the great voice talents like Gary Owens and Sterling Holloway, I saw firsthand about good experience, yada, 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 yada.
Okay.
He's not really getting into the weeds.
Okay.
That's disappointing, but I actually see why you're confused.
Yeah, I'm interested because it's interesting because the fantasy superheroes seem... It's an interesting distinction because the fantasy superheroes seem more grounded than the storybook superheroes.
Yeah.
From just like the choices made or pointed out. Because like the Matrix, the protagonist of the Matrix like starts out from a very grounded place, whereas Harry Potter's a little bit more absurd. You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit, and maybe that I would think that those two things would be switched around, I guess, in regards to how I think about storybook versus fantasy.
Yeah.
And they seem like almost synonymous terms.
It's almost like he's talking about storybook is like animated films and fantasy is anything that's been brought to life, because he lists Peter Pan in storybook, but then in the fantasy he lists Hook. So I don't really see how you can...
I see.
But,
okay.
Yeah. All right. The next subgenre in this thing is the people's superhero, which would be the Three Musketeers, the Mask of Zorro, the Patriot,
right.
Casino Royale, things of that nature. Ben-Hur. And then last but not least, good old webhead himself, Spider-Man. This is the comic book superhero. Batman, Fantastic Four, Credibles, Catwoman, The Crow, Hellboy. And that would be what he calls the superhero genre. Now, about an hour ago, you asked me a question, which was one of the most overlooked or not embraced genres of modern day, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to find out what this is going to be.
After all this big buildup.
I know.
It is a wonderful Oscar bait genre called institutionalized.
Oh, interesting.
And it's basically the one guy taking on the system. And there's so many movies that fall into this. But let's break down the three things you need for an institutionalized movie or a story. Number one, every story in this category is about a group, a family, an organization, or a business that is unique. Number two, the story is a choice, the ongoing conflict pitting what he calls the Brando or a Naif versus the system's company man. And I'll break down those terms in a moment. Number three, finally, there's a sacrifice that must be made, leading to one of three different endings. Join the system, the company, burn it down, or commit suicide. So, before we talk about it, we'll go back a little bit to the two terms that I used that he used, which is, number one, the Brando, which, it's funny, we were talking about Bruce Willis being cast in a lot of similar roles in a genre. Brando is very much the same. The Brando stands opposed to the system by his very nature and reveals its flaws. He named it for Marlon Brando in the film The Wild One, who, when asked what he's rebelling against, he says, "What do you got?" The other character referred to is the company man, which is basically an automaton entrenched in the system. And he makes this weird distinction. He goes, oddly, many of these characters suffer from sexual dysfunction and insanity. So he references Robert Duvall in MASH, Denzel Washington in Training Day, Humphrey Bogart in The Caine Mutiny, Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, and Louise Fletcher in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay. Yeah, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest would definitely be, I mean, very obviously an institutionalized genre of movie.
But then you also have, so he's got like the military institution, which would be Platoon, Few Good Men, We Were Soldiers, Full Metal Jacket, stuff like that. Then he's got the family institution, in which I would never put some of these films in the same genre, but they are. The Godfather, Boys in the Hood, Terms of Endearment, American Beauty, The Royal Tenenbaums, Spanglish.
I mean, one of the movies that comes to my mind is Little Miss Sunshine. Seems to like,
yeah.
It seems like it's kind of that way. It could also be Rites of Passage. It's got a little bit of both of those things.
The second subgenre, business institution, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 9 to 5 Network, Glengarry Glen Ross, Ladder 49, Boiler Room, Pushing 10, Office Space. The Mentor Institution, Dead Poets Society, Training Day, Devil Wear Prada, The Departed, The Emperor's Club, Mona Lisa Smile, Swimming with Sharks, Wall Street. All these films all do kind of tie together. And then you've got something
called... you're right. I was just thinking, like, this genre was really popular late 90s in the aughts.
Yeah.
And kind of disappeared.
Yep.
Like, it's really weird, actually.
Yeah. That's why that's the answer to your question is the institutional one.
Good answer.
And that's incidentally brings me to a shameless plug. That's exactly what I wrote The Indomitable Spirit to be about.
Awesome.
When I was rereading this, when I was kind of, rediscovering my, I don't want to say my abilities, but my skill set or whatever in screenwriting, I was trying to figure out what that story was going to be about, because it can't just be The Karate Kid. The Karate Kid is a superhero movie, going by the genres that we do. It's a mix between kind of Rites of Passage and a superhero movie, which those are kind of muddled together as it is. And I couldn't do that because everybody's going to look at this martial arts film about a martial arts teacher and his student, and the rival martial arts instructor and his students doing battle, and it just could not be about the same thing. So I realized I needed to change it, and I needed to look deeper into some of the themes that I was exploring, and I realized it's actually an institutionalized movie. It's not about, overcoming this one particular foe at a tournament or some shit like that. It's actually about overcoming an ideal, like an institution of ideals, where one person is deciding your value based on how many trophies you won, or what place your trophy is, or what belt you hold as a rank, and things of that kind of nature are determined by other people, by society. And this one particular instructor is not teaching his student about that. He's teaching his student about self-value, self-importance, staying true to yourself, like that kind of ideal. And immediately, once I figured that out, my story was broke. And I mean that in the best way, where it's like it's spilled out in front of me. And I was able to go, that's what needs to happen. There's not going to be a fucking training sequence, wax on, wax off. I don't need any of that shit anymore. What I need is that I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. Like, I need that fucking moment in a fucking karate movie. And that's where everything started coming together for me, was once I realized the appropriate genre for what the story was that I really wanted to tell, what I wanted it to be about. So when I say that's what's missing right now from our culture. You know what I mean? You see all these superhero movies, and the only thing that makes it interesting to me, I have been watching. I don't know if you've been watching, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Have you been keeping up with this? Yet.
No. Okay.
No.
You're not missing much, in my opinion. I'm not a fan of the particular series. However, if you go back to Captain America: Civil War, Baron Zemo. You saw Civil War?
I've seen so many Marvel movies I cannot remember. Like, really, honestly,
Captain America
I'm
fighting.
Sure
it's all of them fighting each other at the airport and shit like that.
I'm pretty sure I've watched it.
Okay,
just refresh my memory.
The whole fight is about Captain America trying to protect his good old friend Bucky Barnes from being killed by Iron Man because he killed Iron Man's parents, and Iron Man is on a grudge fest, and he's like, this guy's dangerous, and Captain America's like, no, he's my best friend, and he's just brainwashed, and I can help him, and da-da-da-da, and they disagree and fight.
Yep.
At the core of that movie, there's a character named Baron Zemo, who is not what I don't know. I'm not a Marvel guy. I don't know the comics well enough, but his MO, his MO in the movie, however, is that we should not have superheroes. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There should be no one standing above anyone else. And his method about going about that change is, reprehensible because he's killing people in order to get it done. But he's trying to turn, Iron Man and Captain America against each other. That, to me, is an institutionalized film right there. You could have told that whole fucking movie with Baron Zemo as the hero, exploring that whole idea of this is a system that's being created of these superheroes doing all this shit. Yeah. We need to tear this down. So
that's basically the Batman Joker dynamic, because that's the Joker's storyline. Is he is fighting against what he sees as the institutionalization of the world, and Batman is representative of that institutionalization, basically.
Right. Which is something that I kind of was disappointed about the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, that they did not. You could very easily, and it's insane to think about this, but you could make the Joker a fucking hero. Like, he is in that movie, kind of, but not in like a real idealistic way. It's more of in a cynical kind of way. But still, like those, like I challenge you to really think of one movie from the last decade outside of, I wouldn't even say Civil War kind of embraces it. They just kind of very piddly made it the villain's MO. But I can't think of very many films, if any at all, off the top of my head, where it's one person fighting an entire system.
I really can't for the life of me either. I mean, some sort. Yes.
How long ago was that, though?
It's been a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I was gonna say, there's certain elements of that in Breaking Bad to a certain extent.
Okay.
You could say that the trajectory of Walter White's like story is how he is basically deinstitutionalizing himself, but it ends tragically, right?
Yeah.
It ends tragically for him and everybody else, but there is a high point, right, in the story of Breaking Bad where he is feeling like he's actually broken out of that system.
Sure.
So it's kind of a deinstitutional. I guess it's sort of a buyer beware of the deinstitutionalization.
Well, but no, you think
story.
about it. He's really going against the institution of criminality and what it is. So there's a key point in Breaking Bad.
That's true.
In Breaking Bad, where they draw the line between him and Gustavo Fring, where Gustavo's willing to kill children to keep his business going, and that's not what Walter White is about in any way, shape, or form. He will protect Jesse. He will protect his kids. He will protect any fucking kid on the street to save them. And it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's the only time he ever really becomes a villain is when spoiler alert, when Todd kills that kid during the train heist. Because while he doesn't do it and he doesn't really try to stop it or anything in the moment, it happens too fast. He does kind of try to pass it off as collateral damage, and that's not something that Walter White would have done anywhere earlier in any of the seasons, whether it be 3 or 4 before that. But that's kind of what leads to the number 3 bullet point of an institutional thing, where it's a sacrifice must be made leading to one of 3 endings: join, burn it down, or commit suicide. And you could argue that he burns it down while committing suicide. He knows he's going to die.
He definitely commits suicide in the sense that the way that he basically, his character basically dies at the end of the... by character, I mean he like literally dies.
Yeah.
But his persona or his soul, I don't know what other word to use, but the thing that people admire about him at the beginning of the show dies at the end, which is what makes it tragic, right? Is the thing that we were always rooting about for Walter White is no longer there because he's gone through this transformation that he just could not turn away. He couldn't turn back from, basically.
Right. But it is an institutionalized story, and that's one of the reasons why it was successful, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, they're fucking Oscar bait. Every single one of these goddamn movies. That's what they're about. I mean, we were looking at some of the genres and stuff like that. I think there was one more subgenre that I left out, which was the issue institution. So you have things like The Big Chill, Shortcuts, Magnolia, Sin City, Friends with Money, Babel, Crash. Those are all institutionalized.
I was going to add one more thing too, and it's interesting because as I'm thinking about it, have you seen much of Better Call Saul?
Oh yeah, I watched all 4 seasons. I'm waiting for the 5th to drop on Netflix.
I think I'm behind a little bit on that show, but I would say that it seems like to me one of the core elements of Better Call Saul is almost an inversion of the institutionalized story, in the sense that Saul is trying to get into the institution. He wants to become part of it. He's not trying to rebel against it, but part of his innate nature is that rebellious aspect. And that's what always kind of...
he's different from what the system wants, and he refuses to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But he still wants in, which is
it's an interesting way to think about that.
But you know what though? It's smart for the showrunner. I forget what his name is off the top of my head. Vince Gilligan. Yeah, he's staying in that lane. He's staying in that genre of institutionalized. He's just playing around with it from a different perspective or a different angle. You know what I mean? Like he knows you can't make Better Call Saul a full triumphant. That's you know what I mean? Because everyone who's a fan of Breaking Bad has that expectation of that same particular genre of institutionalized. He's just coming at it from a different way. And I would argue that, he led with the best one, the best perspective on that story for that genre with Breaking Bad. And that's why Better Call Saul is probably not as hyped as Breaking Bad was, but it's still generally well received from the same audience. Like nobody has been saying, "Oh, it's not as good as Breaking Bad." It's not getting contrasted because it's still existing within that genre.
That's true.
And I think that's the big takeaway that I think everyone who's a storyteller that's listening to this particular episode should take away is knowing your genre can sustain your audience. Like that's how you maneuver within it is up to you. That's where your style and your creativity comes in. But knowing what your audience is there for and being able to provide that to them, to subvert that to them, like all of those things are important to your audience. Maybe they're not important to you. You're more important. You're more focused on, I really want to, get this point across. Fine. Nobody goes to movies or picks up a book for a sermon. That's what church is for. That's what Bible is for. That's why that attendance is dropping at church and people don't want to go, all that kind of stuff. People don't want the lesson. You want to give them the lesson. You want to provide your experience and your thoughts, your philosophies, but you gotta sugarcoat it. You gotta give me a spoonful of something with it. And I think that's what genre is. I think that's the important thing to recognize, is that if you know what it is, you can work well within it. And it's like, I go to my food analogy all the time, where it's, people will say it's formulaic. Yes and no. But if you're making a cupcake, you gotta put it in the cupcake tray so it makes the mold correctly. It doesn't matter if you put chocolate or peanut butter in it, or banana, or vanilla, or strawberry, whatever it is. Those are your flavors, man. Mix them up as you want. Figure out how you're going to make it work. That's great. That's what makes your cupcake great. But you still got to put it in the mold pan so that it makes the form that everybody expects when you tell them you're giving them a cupcake.
So in a lot of ways, genre is the container for your narrative. And you have to, it makes you think about what kind of ingredients you're going to be able to put into that container, because some ingredients are not going to work. You're not, like,
do not put beef brisket into a cupcake.
Yeah.
Or like maybe do it.
Putting a superhero in a horror movie is going to be decidedly more difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be decidedly more difficult than putting, a regular schmuck. Horror works better with some kind of regular schmuck than it does with somebody who is extremely powerful.
Well, you got to look at it.
And I love.
Don't you remember that movie Brightburn?
I haven't seen that movie yet, but I get the sense that it might be that kind of blend of genres.
It's that they've got the superhero, but it's not told from his perspective.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
I could imagine. I don't know if this is what Brightburn is necessarily, but I could imagine a horror movie with a superhero that would be something like, if Superman came to Earth and he did not have the impulse to be helpful and just experienced how horrible human beings were.
That's Brightburn. That's basically, okay. That's it.
Okay.
Which is great, though, because that's something different, man. Like, that's... And while it didn't exactly go... Not to be... it didn't leap a tall building in a single bound. It was definitely different. It probably just needed some more fine-tuning, but that's neither here nor there. How you execute within the genre is also important. You can't just rely on nailing down the tropes, because, and this is going back to Scream. Scream had to come around and subvert expectations about the tropes and the requirements of the sin and this and that, because it had been done to death. It became cliche and trite. So much so that when you went to a horror movie, somebody had sex, you're like, okay, they're going to die. Oh, they're smoking pot. They're going to die. Da-da-da. Like, that's became, everybody figured it out. So your job is to look at it and go, oh, everybody knows what's going to happen. So now I have to figure out a way to make it not happen that way, but still have it happen that way, but not that way. Yep. So, like, I'm looking at my film for The Indomitable Spirit. It's an institutionalized film. I got to figure out a way. You've seen The Godfather. You've seen A Few Good Men. You've seen these movies. You know basically what could possibly happen. So it's my responsibility as the artist, the storyteller, to figure out how to throw you off so that you watch it and you're like, shit, what's going to happen next? Like, that's the most important thing. And I would think that you would probably agree with that, Mr. Rainwater, because when you're doing like a webcomic, you got to keep people hooked for the next episode, right?
Yeah.
Do you right?
Yep.
Unless it's the end of the season, or even then, you got to do like the Marvel Easter egg after the credits and be like, this is what's coming, or who knows what could happen.
It's the most terribly difficult part of doing, because it's basically like any serial natured storytelling, right? Like,
don't change that
TV
channel.
shows, yeah, exactly. Like TV shows, whatever. Definitely have to figure, at the end of every episode, you have to figure out some way to give a hook, some reason to come back. Because if you just end on like, and then everything was great, and it's like, well, okay, why should I even bother?
Yeah.
Like, there's got to be a little something. There's got to be something in the corner of the screen shakes that gets your attention. You're like, oh wait, what the hell is that? Or like, you know what I mean? Some indication that there's something coming up next that will either change the course of your expectations for the story, or change what's going to happen to the protagonist or the antagonist, whoever it is, within the story. But anyway, this has been a very interesting episode for me, Jow, because I've learned a lot tonight about how to think about genre. I have a whole new way to think about it. And as we were talking about previously, I started off, talking about genre being the expectations that you bring into a narrative. And now I'm kind of looking at it in a more nuanced way of thinking about not just structure, but structure in the sense of how do the A to B to C's connect, and how do those things feed into the themes of a story, because the kind of genres that you're talking about, and this is Blake Snyder, was that his name?
Yeah, Save the Cat is the book series that he did. Yeah.
The way he's structuring it gives me new ways of thinking about how to orient story around theme, because it seems like it's the way he's describing is in a way very oriented more around theme rather than convention. I don't know how else to put it, but
that sounds. I would put it that way. Yeah.
So that is definitely food for thought for the future, and I'll be mulling over it tonight after this conversation.
Would absolutely recommend his books. There's about 3 or 4 of them. He unfortunately passed away after he did, I think, the 3rd book. It's like he did Save the Cat Goes to the Movies, Save the Cat Strikes Back.
Okay.
They're all just examples of structure and genre, and I don't want like archetypes, like character archetypes. And he basically just goes into them, and when I first read it, it blew my mind. It was just like, wow, all these fancy books that I read when I went to college about threshold guardians and the lieutenants and this and shit. Things that went into my head, and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Where does the lieutenant rank in the army? I don't know if he's above a colonel or like, I don't understand shit like that. But when he says, oh, this person is your secondary bad guy and your third bad, he just made it as basic as fucking possible. He didn't try to act smarter than his audience, and that taught me so much, because I'm looking at it and it's like, where the fuck do you come up with the idea for a book titled Save the Cat? What the fuck is he talking about? And what he's talking about is aliens. Mm-hmm. And the whole, like, he talks about the reason why you root for Ripley. Yeah, she's kind of stern. Yeah, she's smart and all this kind of stuff. Those aren't really reasons why, those are things that are important to her character. Yes. But why are we rooting for her? Well, we want to see her survive. Yeah, but why? Because she's a good person. Well, how do we know that? She saved the fucking cat. That was it. That was all she fucking did was save a cat. And suddenly everyone's on her side. And it could have been, I could write a companion series to this called Kill the Dog. And immediately everyone who's seen John Wick understands. Like, that's the point. Yeah. You got to know why your character does this and that. But then I guess that, I don't know if that falls into genre or not, whether or not you want to root for the protagonist. That's a debatable thing for another day, I guess. But
that is definitely definitely a topic for another episode, because that is a whole
character is definitely one we should definitely do at some point.
Yes,
I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on that one, Mr. Rainwater.
Yeah, I have a lot of maybe confusing thoughts too about it.
That's okay. But anyway, that has been Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory for this week, folks. Again, that book series that I referenced was Save the Cat, and the book that I was reading from was Save the Cat Goes to the Movies. But you pretty much get a little bit of that whole idea in all of his books. I would definitely recommend them. They were great. They were very helpful for me understanding a lot of things, and helped me write the screenplays that started getting produced, that started getting bought, that started winning me film festivals, although I wouldn't recommend wasting your money at a film festival for a screenplay competition. But that's neither here nor there. So if you're interested, check out those books. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on genre. So if you feel like it, you can tweet at me at theanjow, TheAnjow, and that's on good old Twitter. shoot me some of your thoughts. I'm curious. I always love breaking into discussions like this. Like with you, Mr. Rainwater, this has been the fun 90 minutes for me. Just talking about this kind of shit.
Absolutely. Yeah, if y'all wanna chime in and include me in the conversation, you can also include me in as at Matt J Rainwater in your conversation about genre. I love to join in on that conversation because it is one that there's always new things to learn. As for me, I did tonight. I learned a lot of new things. So thanks for hanging out, everybody, and y'all have a good one.